I've never been one to believe those strange stories people tell. But after that night, I can't ignore them anymore. This happened 5 years ago, when I needed to travel to the countryside for work. It was a very isolated place, few houses scattered throughout the bush, and the kind of silence that was uncomfortable. The forecast was already warning of a strong storm, so I rented a simple cabin on the side of a dirt road. It wasn't much, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and a tiny living room with an old fireplace. The owner handed me the key and only said one thing before leaving. "If you hear anything outside, I'm sure you didn't hear it." At the time, I thought it was just people from the countryside trying to scare outsiders. The rain started around 8 in the evening, and in less than half an hour, the thunder was already making the walls vibrate. I was sitting in the armchair trying to get a signal on my cell phone when I heard the first laugh. I thought it was all in my head, the wind or even the creaking wood. But then it came again. It was a childish laugh, somewhat muffled, as if there was someone outside very close to the window. I stood still, waiting to hear something else. But all that came was another thunder, so loud that I felt it in my chest. That's when I noticed something strange. The laughter seemed to have come closer. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but then it happened again. Another laugh, and this time, it sounded like it was coming from the door. My stomach froze. I knew there was no one out there. That cabin was in the middle of nowhere, with no neighbors nearby. And who in their right mind would leave a child playing in the rain like that? I got up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and went to the window. It was dark outside. The rain was falling heavily and forming puddles on the dirt floor. But then, in a flash of lightning, I saw it. A small figure standing at the entrance to the trail. But the next moment, in the dark, I couldn't see anything. My first instinct was to move away from the window. I tried to laugh nervously, convincing myself that it must have been a swinging branch or something. But before I could even sit down again, another thunder exploded in the sky, and with it came more laughter. It wasn't just one. There were several. They echoed around my cabin, some distant, others seeming to be right in my ear. My entire body shivered, and the only thing I could do was lock the door. It didn't make sense. I knew the lock was old and anyone could break it, but it was the only way for me to feel remotely protected. Then suddenly, everything went silent. No laughter, no thunder, just the sound of rain. For a moment, I thought it was all over. I took a deep breath, trying to laugh, but that's when I heard something that really made my blood run cold. 3 knocks on the door, dry, spaced. Someone, or something, was out there. My entire body froze, and my mind began to race, in 1,000 ways. Who would knock on the door in the middle of one of these? I stood still, without the courage to move. Then the knocks came again, but now, louder. My heart was racing. The only thing I could do was take a step back, as if that would protect me from whatever was there. But the worst came later. In the suffocating silence, a childish voice whispered from the other side of the door. Low, hoarse, almost like a moan. "Can we come in?" I feel my entire body working. It wasn't a child. I don't know how to explain it, but something in that voice was wrong. It was too thin, too dragging, as if someone was imitating a child, but not really knowing how it should go up. My entire body shivered, and at that moment I knew that if I opened that door, I would never see myself again. I stood there, still, holding my breath, waiting. But nothing happened. No new beats, no laughter. Just the insistent sound of rain hammering the roof. I don't know how long I stood there, holding my breath. My legs were shaking, and the silence outside only worsened the feeling that something horrible was about to happen. Then, without warning, another thunderclap lit up everything for a split second. And that was all it took for me to see. Through the crack in the window, with no reflection from the wet glass, I saw small silhouettes scattered around the cabin. They were children, or at least they were. They were standing still, looking in the direction of the house. The lightning passed, and when darkness returned, I could no longer see anything. But I knew they were still there. They were waiting. My chest felt so tight that I felt like I was going to faint. Everything inside me screamed not to make noise, not to show that I knew they were there. But then, what came next made me lose all control. The laughter came again, all at the same time like a distorted chorus. Only now they were no longer outside. They came from inside the cabin. They seemed to be everywhere, behind me on the ceiling, in the dark corners of the room. I turned around in despair, looking at everything. But there was no one there. It was as if the voices were in the air, filling the space without a body to belong to. My eyes were watering with pure terror. I was trapped there, and they were with me. I wanted to run, scream, do anything, but my body just wouldn't respond. The laughter echoed inside the cabin, getting louder and louder, as if it was making fun of my terror. My only instinct was to close my eyes and cover my ears, trying to block out the infernal one. But it was no use. I felt their presence, as if they were positioning themselves around me, surrounding me. It felt like, at any moment, little hands were grabbing my arms, my legs, my neck. That was when I noticed a detail that made me almost vomit with fear. The fireplace, which until then had been lit, went out, all at once, as if someone had blown the flames away. The darkness took over the comfort, and at that moment, everything stopped. No laughter, no voices, no thunder, only the sound of the rain, now faint, as if it were moving away. I remained still, sweating cold, without the courage to open my eyes. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but the silence was so absolute that I began to wonder if I had imagined it all. Was it an outbreak? Some kind of hallucination due to tiredness? But then, in the midst of that total darkness, I felt something that removed any doubt. A breath. Weak, short, very close to my face. I opened my eyes in reflex instinct, but there was nothing there. Nothing visible, at least. The air was heavy, thick, as if the cabin itself had been chosen around me. My lungs were honestly too small to breathe, and all I could do was stare into the dark, expecting the worst. But then suddenly, another thunder exploded in the sky, lighting up everything for a split second. And in that instant, I saw it. A few centimeters from my face, two pale, deep-set eyes stared at me. They had no life. There was nothing. They were just there, watching me, fixed, as if they were waiting for me to do something. But before I could react, the flash of lightning was gone, and everything returned to darkness. I don't remember exactly what happened next. The next thing that came to mind was the sound of the rain, already lighter, and the timid clarity of dawn arriving through the window. The cabin was just as I had left it, with the only difference being the fireplace being turned off and an unbearable chill in the air. I left without looking back, got in the car, and drove without stopping until I reached the nearest city. I never told this story to anyone, and I never went back to that place. But to this day, when a storm starts to brew, I find myself holding my breath, waiting to hear that laughter again, and hoping, with every fiber of my being, that they never find me again. I've never been one to scare easily. I always thought these haunted phone stories, unknown number, were pure invention, or, at most, some prank. But this was different. It all started about 3 weeks ago, when I started receiving calls from a number I had never seen before, always at the same time, 02:32 a.m. At first, I ignored it. I thought it was some kind of prank, scam, whatever. But after the third or fourth time, I started to get restless. Who the hell always calls at the same time, without saying anything? The worst thing is that when I answer, I only hear a faint, metallic noise, like muffled breathing at the end of the line. After a week, I couldn't sleep properly anymore. The phone ringing woke me up every night, and that silence on the other end started to mess with me. I decided to block the number, but it didn't help. The next night, the phone rang again. The same number, same time. My heart almost came out of my mouth. That's when a stupid idea hit me. I was tired, irritated, and I needed to know who was bothering me. So, without thinking much, I waited for 2:33 a.m., picked up the phone, and I returned the call. The phone rang 3 times. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to come out of my chest. I was ready to curse whoever it was. But when the call finally answered, I froze. There was no background noise, no strange sounds, nothing. Just absolute silence. And then a voice came from the other side. My voice. It wasn't similar. It wasn't someone imitating. Was exactly my voice, speaking in an urgent, desperate tone. Please don't answer. It was enough to make my blood run cold. I got goosebumps all over my arm, and I immediately hung up the phone, throwing it away like it was burning. I stood there, breathing quickly, trying to understand what had just happened. That doesn't make sense. How could someone be using my voice? I waited for my cell phone on the floor, waiting for something to happen. But nothing. Just the silence of the early morning and the sound of the clock on the wall, ticking sur 34. That's when I realized I had made a mistake. A huge mistake. Because at that exact moment, my phone rang again. Same number, same location. Only now, he wasn't calling anymore. He had already answered. The phone was on the floor, but the call was already active. The screen glowed, showing the unknown number and the corrected timer, as if someone was on the line. I hadn't touched anything. My chest stopped. That absolute silence seemed heavier now, as if it had something to it, listening to me on the other side. Then came the sound, the breath, short, irregular, but it wasn't mine. It was something else. Something was breathing on the other end of the line, and it seemed closer. My entire body shivered when I realized that the noise wasn't just coming from the phone. He was coming from the bedroom. My throat dries up. My instinct was to look around, but the room was dark. The only glow was from the cell phone screen on the floor, casting faint shadows on the walls. I knew I would hang up first, but I couldn't move. The counter on the cell phone ticked 02:35, 3-minute call. Then, without warning, my voice, it came up again. Only now it didn't seem like a request. It seemed like a warning. You didn't miss calling back. My heart stopped. The sentence didn't come from the phone. She came from behind me. My entire body seized up. The room was cold. My skin tingled and I felt something behind me. It wasn't just a shiver or an irrational fear. There was someone there. The problem was I knew that if I turned around, I wouldn't like what I saw. My breathing became short, heavy, and the phone was still on the floor, with the call active. The digital clock on the table blinked 02:36. Time felt wrong, like it had been stretched out, but maybe it was my own fear messing with my perception. Then very slowly, I forced myself to turn my head, just enough to see out of the corner of my eye. There was a reflection on the black TV screen, and it wasn't just mine. My eyes burned so much that I forced myself not to blink. In the reflection, next to my silhouette, there was another figure, identical to me. Same outfit, same position. But the face wasn't right. The mouth was a little open, as if it were trying to speak, and the eyes were empty, dull, like a mannequin that was trying to be human and failing miserably. And then slowly, the copy of me irradiated. It wasn't a natural smile. It was something pulled, requested, as if the skin was stretched beyond what it should be. And before I could react, the TV screen went black again. The reflection disappeared. But I realized at that very moment that the thing was still in the room with me. I can't breathe properly. My chest rose and fell quickly. The air rushed into my throat, and everything inside me screamed for don't look back. But my body no longer felt like mine. My hands were sweaty, shaking, and I felt an overwhelming presence behind me, as if someone was glued on my back, waiting for me to make the mistake of turning around completely. The phone was still on the floor. The screen was on. But the call was no longer active. The number disappeared from the screen, as if it had never existed. That's when the worst possible thing happened. The phone rang again. High, shrill. The sound exploded in the room, and this time, it didn't come from my cell phone. The ringing came from the closet. The noise repeated, insistent, increasingly louder, as if the room itself vibrated with it. My eyes burned. My entire body begged me to run. But I couldn't move. It was then that, amidst the insistent ringing, the closet door started to open by itself, slowly, creaking, revealing absolute pitch black inside. And before I could react, before I could think about running, the phone rang, stopped. Instantly, silence crushed me. And then, out of that deep darkness of the closet, my own voice whispered, "It's too late now." I don't remember what happened next. The last thing my brain registered was that voice, my voice, coming out of the closet, and then the blackout. When I woke up, it was already morning. The room looked normal, as if nothing had happened. The phone was in the same place where I had thrown it. No calls recorded, no history of the unknown number. But I knew it hadn't been a dream. I felt like something had changed. My house felt wrong, like everything was a little out of place, like I didn't belong there anymore. Since that night, I have never received a phone call again. Oro 2H32. But sometimes when I walk past a mirror or see my reflection in a dark window, I have the strange feeling that he's not moving at the same time as me. As if there was still something there. Me imitating, me waiting. And the worst of all? Every time I pick up the phone now, for a millisecond, before I hear any voice on the other end, I swear I hear a hushed whisper saying, "It's too late now." I've never been superstitious, but after that night, I can't look in a mirror without feeling a chill down my spine. I've always been passionate about photography, and a few weeks ago, I decided to test an old camera that I bought at a thrift store. It was one of those analog ones, which use film, very simple. but with a nostalgic charm. I spent the night taking some photos in my apartment to test the lighting, pendants, that sort of thing. In a moment of boredom, an idea came to me. Why not take a photo in the mirror? I took the camera, positioned myself in front of the bedroom mirror, and clicked. Just like that. No flash, no big deal. Just any test. The problem started when I developed the photos. I went to get the roll of film from the lab a few days later, and as I was flipping through the images, I almost dropped everything on the floor. The reflection in the photo wasn't right. My body was there, holding the camera in the same position I remembered. But my head was turned to the side. I wasn't looking into the lens. My reflection was looking into the distance, as if seeing something behind me. My stomach instantly turned. I kept looking at that photo, trying to find some logical explanation. Maybe a glitch in the film, a weird blur, anything. But it doesn't make sense. The image was clear, too sharp. It was me there holding the camera, but the reflection was wrong. The way my head was turned seemed natural, but I was absolutely sure that at the moment of the click, I was looking straight into the mirror. The only thing that made sense was that the photo had captured something that shouldn't be there. I was so upset that I decided to test it again. I grabbed the camera and went straight to the mirror, trying to reproduce the same photo. This time, I turned on the light in the entire room and paid attention to every movement. I held the camera steady, looked directly into my own eyes in the reflection, and clicked. The camera made the dry sound of capture, and for a second a shiver ran down my spine. I swear I saw something move in the mirror at the exact moment I took a photo. But when I lowered the camera to look better, my reflection was still there. But he took half a second longer to imitate me. My blood ran cold. That split second was enough for me to know something was very wrong. It was as if my reflection had become distracted, as if he was waiting for me to look away before moving. My chest opened, and the only thing I could do was take a step back, keeping my eyes fixed on the mirror. But the more I stared, the more it seemed like something in my image was wrong. My eyes were sunken. My face seemed out of place, as if there was a shadow where there shouldn't be. And then, in the silence of the room, I saw. My reflection blinked, but I hadn't blinked. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. My eyes in the mirror closed and opened on their own, without me moving a single muscle. My heart skipped a beat, and I dropped the camera on the floor, without thinking. The sound of the impact echoed through the room, but I didn't move. My reflection was now perfectly normal, copying every detail of my pavement. But I knew I had seen it. He moved before me. My entire body was shaking, but I couldn't look away. What if he moved again? The silence in the room became suffocating, and I could hear my own heart pounding inside my chest. The camera fell to the floor, but I didn't dare pick it up. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to give that any chance. Whatever it was, my mind tried to rationalize, repeat that I was tired, that I avoided blinking without realizing it. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a mistake. My breath began to fail, and everything inside me screamed to get out of there. But then, in the midst of my panic, something even worse happened. The transmitted reflection. I'm not smiling. My mouth was still closed, tense, but in the mirror, my image opened a slow, drawn-out, overly requested smile. The skin around the mouth seemed to stretch more than natural, and the teeth were exposed for too long, as if that reflex was testing me. Me teasing. And then, as if to make sure I was really seeing it, he cocked his head to the side. It was at that moment that I ran. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just turned and left the room. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. But all that mattered was getting away from that mirror. I locked myself in the bathroom, felt on the floor, and tried to fool myself, but my whole body was shaking. That couldn't have happened. It was impossible. Reflexes don't age alone. Reflections know. They smile before you. But I saw it. I know I saw it. And the more I thought about it, the more the fear grew inside me. Because I left the mirror behind. But did he let me go? I stayed there for over an hour, breathing deeply, trying to muster the courage to leave. When I finally had the strength, I opened the bathroom door slowly, my eyes already fixed on the mirror. The room was empty. Everything seemed normal. The camera was still on the floor, facing up. My reflection was there, still, exactly as it should be. But something inside me said that it wasn't the same reflection that was there before. And then, while I was still looking, something made my blood run cold. In the corner of the mirror, almost imperceptible, there was a condensation mark, as if someone had placed their mouth against the glass and whispered on the other side. I didn't sleep that night, not even next time. I spent hours going through the camera, the photo negative, trying to find some logical explanation. But the image remained the same, my reflection looking to the side. After a few days, I made the only decision that felt right. I covered every mirror in the house, with cloths, sheets, anything. Even the TV screen made me uncomfortable. I knew it was paranoia, but I couldn't trust what I saw reflected. Something inside me told me that if I looked too long, I would see something I shouldn't. I ended up moving a few weeks later, trying to leave it behind. But I never took a photo in a mirror again. In fact, avoid even looking at them for too long. Because sometimes there is quick reflection. From a window or on a polished surface, I feel something watching me back, as if it were still there, waiting for me. And the worst. Once I was distracted, forgot about my own rule, and looked into a mirror on the street. It was only a second, but it was enough for me to freeze. 'Cause I swear, my reflection blinked before me. I've always been cool about staying in Airbnbs. I've stayed in simple, luxurious, old, modern places. I've never had a problem. But this time something happened, something I can't explain to this day. I was traveling for work and needed to rent a small apartment for a few days. The price was great, the location was great, and the photos were normal. I arrived late in the afternoon, got the key from the safe, and got in without any problems. The place was simple but comfortable. A small studio, with a bed against the wall, a kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom. Nothing else. But as soon as I closed the door, I had a strange feeling, as if someone had just left there. I tried to ignore it. I put my bags on the floor, turned on the Wi-Fi, and did what I always do. I looked around the place to see if everything was okay. The bathroom was clean, the bed was made, and the only window looked out onto a dark, narrow side alley. I was starting to feel more at ease, until I noticed something strange. The bathroom mirror was dirty, but it does not contain dust or watermarks. It looked like a handprint. Someone had leaned there, as if they had leaned against the glass with their palm flat. The problem? I was the first person to enter the apartment that day. I looked at that mark for a while, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe the cleaning was done poorly. Maybe it was a previous guest. But something about that handprint bothered me. It was very clear, as if it had been made recently. I ran my hand over the glass, but it was dry, without steam or moisture. The apartment was cold because of the air conditioning, so it didn't make sense. My chest opened a little, but I tried not to think about it too much. I grabbed my toiletry bag and went to brush my teeth. But it wasn't until I lifted my head again and looked in the mirror that I noticed something that made me freeze instantly. The handprint had disappeared. I blinked several times, trying to understand. I didn't touch the mirror. I didn't clean anything. But the brand was no longer there, as if it had never existed. I pulled away slowly, feeling a shiver run down my spine. My instinct screamed that something was wrong. That place, it was not empty. Suddenly, a noise came from the room. A dry click, as if someone had stepped on the wooden floor. I was no longer alone there. My body locked up. The noise had been clear coming from the living room, but I knew there was no one else there. Or at least, it shouldn't have. My heart started to beat faster. I tried to convince myself that it could be the building creaking, a neighbor making noise, anything rational. But then, I heard it again. A snap closer, as if something had moved inside the apartment. I wanted to get out of there right away, but my legs were glued to the floor. I look around, trying to find something wrong, something out of place. That's when I realized the kitchen cabinet door, it was open. I was pretty sure it was closed when I walked in, but now I was ajar, with a dark gap peeking inside. My breathing became shallow. Every instinct inside me screamed at me not to come closer, but my body moved on its own. Slowly, I took a step toward the closet. More. And then before I could touch it, it closed itself, with a second bang. The noise echoed through the apartment, too dry and loud to be just a wind or a fault in the section. Someone, or something, had closed that closet. My heart was racing. My palms were sweaty, and I could no longer think of any logical explanation. That wasn't just a creaking. It wasn't the building moving. Something was there with me. The silence that came after was even worse. No sounds from neighbors, no traffic noise, nothing. It was as if the entire apartment was watching me, waiting for my next move. The only thing I could do was grab my backpack and run to the door. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a few seconds to unlock the lock. When I finally managed to open it, I almost stumbled into the hallway. The air outside felt lighter, as if I had just escaped from a place that had been closed for too long. But when I looked inside the apartment one last time, I saw something that made me lose my breath. The bathroom mirror was at a perfect angle to reflect the room. And there, in the reflection of the window, I saw a silhouette standing still. I wasn't in the room. It only appeared in the mirror. My body stopped responding. My brain wanted to run, but my legs just did not obey. I stood there, standing in the doorway, looking in the mirror, trying to process what I was selling. The silhouette does not move. She was tall, thin, completely still, and her back was turned to me. But I knew. She knew I was there. He knew I was looking. My stomach turned and dread took over my body. If I took a step inside, would it turn around for me? It was at that moment that the light in the apartment flickered. For a second, everything went dark. Oh, runner. Room. Oh, bathroom. Oh, mirror. And when the light came back, the silhouette had turned around. But it wasn't just a shadow. It was me. I was looking at myself without a reflection, but my face was wrong. The thing's smile didn't look human. It was too tight, stretched almost to the skin. And the eyes, they had nothing inside. Empty, deep, looking at me as if already information that I would return. As if you were waiting. I didn't stay to see anything else. I ran. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. I went down as if something had been left behind. Or worse, as if something had come with me. I never went back to that Airbnb. I contacted the host the next day and made up some excuse to cancel the rest of the stay. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if my mind played a trick on me or if I really saw it something that shouldn't be there. But there is it's just that I'm not in it. I've always liked traveling alone to isolated places. There's something liberating about being away from the noise of the city, without worries, without anyone around. But after that night, I could never relax in a remote place. This happened last winter. I had a little cabin in the mountains where I could spend a peaceful weekend. Just me, a good book, and a bottle of whiskey. I arrived in the afternoon, lit the fireplace, and watched the snow fall outside. The silence was absolute, and the white landscape made time seem slower. It was exactly what I wanted. Night came quickly, and the cold set in. The wind was blowing hard, and the trees creaked outside. Around 2 a.m, I was already in bed when I heard the first sound. One dry touch the window. It's not very strong, but enough to make me open my eyes. I stood there for a while trying to hear anything else. Maybe a branch beating, maybe some animal. But then it came again. 3 spaced beats. Knock, knock, knock. Slowly, I turned to look at the window. And that's when my blood ran cold. There were no footprints in the snow. My chest opened instantly. The cabin was isolated, and the snow around it was untouched since late afternoon. If there was someone out there, the footprints would be visible. But there was nothing. Just a perfect white cloak, reflecting the dim moonlight. I lay still for a few seconds, waiting for another sound. Anything that would indicate I was just paranoid. And then, the knocking returned. Touch, touch, touch. This time, stronger, more insistent. And the worst, they came from a different window. My heart raced. I sat down on the bed slowly, trying to control my breathing. Someone was walking outside, but how? No footprints? The wind outside was howling, but now I could make out one breath. Weak, muffled, very close to the glass. Someone, or something, was there. My stomach dropped, and I knew in that moment I couldn't look. I instinctively knew that if I looked directly at the window, something would be waiting for me on the other side. My skin was covered in goosebumps. Every instinct inside me screamed to, "Don't look." But curiosity and fear held a lump in my throat. I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and slowly turned my head toward the window. The glass was covered with a thin layer of ice, distorting the view outside. But still, I saw a shadow, standing right on the other side of the glass. It had no defined shape, just a dark, motionless outline. And then very slowly the thing leaned closer. I froze. The air seemed to have gone out of the room, and all I could hear was the sound of the wind cutting outside. My eyes were fixed on that silhouette, waiting for it to move again, waiting for it to do something. But suddenly the knocking started again. Tock, tock, tock. Only now, it came from another window. My muscles seized up. How did it move so fast? No footprints, no sound. It was impossible. But it was happening. My entire body was rigid, heart hammering against my chest. The knocking continued, steady, methodical. And now it came from 2 windows at the same time. Touch, 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 touch. One on one side of the chalet, another from the other, as if it was surrounding the house. My mind desperately tried to find a rational explanation, but nothing made sense. It couldn't be a person. Nobody moves that fast, and there were no footprints in the snow. Nothing. Just the white void, and the one that insists on the glass. My breath was short. My entire body had goosebumps. And then, do nothing, the beat stopped. The silence was so absolute that my ears rang. The wind outside seemed to have stopped, as if the entire world had stopped together. And that's when I heard it. Something scratching the wood of the door. Slow. Calculated? How if that knew I was listening? My blood ran cold. I didn't know which was worse, the sound itself or the certainty that, if that was at the door, he hadn't walked through the snow to get there. I feel breathing. The scratching on the door was faint but constant, as if something was testing the wood, feeling the texture, waiting for a response. The silence around was almost deafening. The wind had stopped, the forest was vacuumed, and the only thing that existed in the world at that moment was that sound, scratched, slow, almost careful. My mind screamed at me not to move, not to make noise, but the terror was so great that my hand shook as I held the blanket over my chest. And then, what changed? It was no longer a scratch. It was a whispered phrase. Low, hoarse. How the wind passes through a narrow crack. But there was a rhythm to it, a cadence, almost like words. But not in a language I knew. Someone, or something, was murmuring on the other side of the door. My eyes started to water. My throat caught. I didn't want to know what it was saying. Everything inside me screamed that I shouldn't listen. I didn't know what to do. Run where? Outside, the snow was deep, the cold was biting, and I didn't even know what was there. My entire body was shaking, not just from fear, but from a strange sensation, as if it already knew I was scared. The murmur continued, low and incomprehensible, but now it was the closest. It no longer came from the door. My chest opened when I realized that the sound was inside the chalet. My stomach turned. It doesn't make sense. The door was locked. The windows were closed. Nobody entered. But the message was there. Behind me. My body locked up. I could feel something in the room. A suffocating presence. Slowly, my vision slid to the mirror on the other side of the room. The room's reflection seemed normal, except for one thing. The reflection from the window showed a shadow outside. But when I actually looked at the window, there was nothing there. My heart almost stopped. The mirror, it was showing something that didn't exist in reality. In the reflection, the shadow outside was tall, slender, faceless. But I was looking. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt that it was watching me. My hands were cold. Sweat was running down my forehead, and everything inside me was screaming at me not to make any sudden movements. But then the thing moved. In reflection, the shadow expresses an arm. Slowly, in a slow movement, as if she wasn't used to moving in that way. My stomach dropped when you realized what she was doing. She looked at her hand and started tapping on the glass. Talk, talk, talk. But the sound was coming from the actual window, even without anyone there, even with the outside completely empty. The noise was happening right next to me. It was enough for my body to finally react. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what would happen if I stayed there one more second. I grabbed the keys with shaking hands and unlocked the door in such a hurry that I almost broke the lock. The cold night air hit me like a blade. But I didn't even feel it. I just wanted to get out of there. I threw myself out and ran through the snow without looking back, my feet sinking with each step, the wind cutting into my skin. My car was about 10 meters from the chalet, but the distance seemed endless. And it was then, right when I was at the vehicle door, that I made the mistake of looking. The cabin was dark, but the shadow was still at the window. Stop. Property. Looking at me. Only now the footprints were in the snow, and it came towards me.